What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with a little bit of a new video series. Going to be going over last week's lineups, our exposure, some of the things that went right for us, some of the things that unfortunately went wrong as well. So we can take a few things away from the slate, perhaps change up our strategies going forward, and really just give you an inside look to some of the process that I go through week to week after a slate to try to, improve week to week, right? If we're going out there using the same process week in and week out, that might work for some people long term, but us engineers, us fine tuners, problem solvers like myself, if you didn't know, I'm an electrical engineer by trade, are always trying to tinker and trying to become even more efficient. So I kind of gonna open up the book here, give you guys an idea of what I'm doing week to week. Now this is coming out on a Tuesday, but going forward, this is going to be posted early Monday morning. So before we really hop into the next slate, that sort of thing, this will be the type of deep breakdown of last week that we're going with. We'll talk through the optimal lineup, whether I profited this week, where I was able to get some of units and maybe lost a few units this week. We'll talk about that. And then we'll go player by player, talking about some of the optimal plays, whether they were high owned, chalk, like you saw with the Patrick Cantlay this week, or some of those low owned diamonds in the rough, and their implications for some of these large field contests. So sit back. This may actually be a live stream going forward as well on Monday mornings. Maybe a video, still haven't decided on that. But I'd say down in the comments, go ahead and let me know if you'd prefer this in a video or a live stream format. Obviously, there's benefits to both. For the live stream, you'd be able to ask live questions, kind of cater the live analysis to you, whereas in a video format, it's a little bit higher production quality, that sort of thing. So go ahead and let me know your thoughts down below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing started. So the first thing we'll do is take a look at the optimal lineup. So in the $5 GPP, which was 25 grand to first, Dust 197323 took down the contest with, I would say, a hybrid build, right? You have that piece of 43% chalk up top with Patrick Cantlay, who we'll have to talk about for sure here in a little bit when we go player by player. But winner Tom Kim, piece of chalk in Matthew Neesmith, and then three relatively medium owned options, right? Nobody that's like 0.51% owned. It was a nearly 10% Putnam. You had Martin Laird in there, who unbelievably had 2 birdie streaks and a bogey, no bogey free rounds, yet still made it to the optimal lineup. Only scoring 92 points, and then S.H. Kim at the bottom, who ended up scoring 125. So the thing I really want to note here before we hop into the player-by-player analysis is just how imperfect this lineup is. A lot of the optimals around the industry left a good amount of salary on the table, yet you can see in this 24,000 entry contest here, a lineup that was far from optimal ended up winning. In fact, a solid like 20 to 25 points off of the quote-unquote optimal build that you could make. So I think there's a misconception out there that you have to build the optimal lineup to win these large field GPPs. You really have to hit something within maybe 1 to 2% of the optimal. You don't have to go out there and hit the absolute nuts. That's why leaving salary on the table is a great way to differentiate yourself. But if you're doing so to try and get to that quote-unquote optimal build, which a lot of times is leaving $1,000 or even $2,000 of salary on the table, more often than not, you're shooting yourself in the foot, because you don't even need that lineup to win most GPPs. In fact, I can't even remember a GPP that was won by somebody who left more than $1,000 on the table when it came to their salary. It's just something that you don't have to do, right? You can leave $300, $400 on the table. I think that makes plenty of sense. But in this type of scenario, they used all of their salary. They went up, they took an expenses option at $11,000. Their second man in was winner Tom Kim, and then they lived in the 7K range. There was no outlandish 6K option that they went to. They really skipped over that 8K range, which a lot of people, including myself this week, thought would be a relatively low-owned, sneaky range, except for the fact that you had all these guys in the 7K range that were pretty reasonably owned go off, right? Like a Matthew Neesmith, for example. I mean, Mark Hubbard had a pretty good week. When we go through the player-by-player analysis, I mean, there were guys that were finishing up there in the top 10 to top 15 that were scoring in the 110s to at least 115 range, all over the place, like a solid like 5 or 6 players. So you could have taken any of those guys in the 7K range and gone away with it. I mean, even the number 2 lineup, which was actually entered twice, which was a little bit crazy to me. Look at it, right? 2 guys up top and then just peppering the 7K range, right? Harry Hall was, I guess, a little bit cheaper. So he went up a little bit more expensive to take Amito Pereira. So that was the implications of that. We played Harry Hall this week too, so we'll talk about him later. There was just a lot of these 7K options, right? This is another one of those, 2 guys up top and then a bunch of 7K options. That was the optimal build for this week. And, it changes week to week out there. I just wanted to go ahead and point it out. I didn't have Patrick Cantlay in my player pool, which we're going to talk about here in a second. That was the only reason I couldn't get to this build, right? Because I started a lot of my builds with a Tom Kim, a Taylor Montgomery, a Sungjae Im, for example. And though it's only a $700 difference between Cantlay and then where Sungjae Im was in terms of the pricing, there was also a 25-point gap. And then that $700, would take me from somebody like a Matthew Neesmith up to one of those 8K options, like a JT Poston, for example, who didn't play poorly, right? He still posted nearly 100 fantasy points. But if you want to win these large field contests where you're getting, $25,000 to first place, that sort of thing, you have to hit the absolute nuts. Now, we're going to talk about the strategy here in a second. When somebody's a lot higher owned than anybody else and you have to hit the absolute nuts in a contest, you'd be remiss to go out there and trying to play the guys that are, 40% owned, like a Patrick Cantlay, or a 12% owned, like a Matthew Neesmith. It's just that the chalk got there last week, right? So if you were one of those players that, was buying in on that popular narrative, you definitely were paid off last week. And you saw a lot of people on Twitter and in the golf community have a solid week last week, right? Unfortunately, from the numbers perspective, more often than not, those narratives end up failing, right? And you see a lot of people complaining on Twitter, especially after somebody gets injured and people want to fade the golfer. I mean, we've seen Colin Morikawa win after multiple instances of quote-unquote injuries or something going wrong with the swing before a golf tournament. Those are the sort of things that you don't want to look into too much. In terms of my personal exposure, you can see it on the screen. This was a $5 GPP, so 150 entries. I had $750 in entries and won $583 back. So ended up losing, just under $170 on the week, which honestly isn't all that bad. I think something I want to do with this here is also set your expectations. If you're winning most of your money back on a GPP, I don't know you should be all that disappointed with it. My player pool, as you're going to see here in a second, I had 8 of the top 10 scores in my player pool, yet I lost money this week, right? So I would think that, from a top level perspective, if you could tell me that I'd have 8 of the top 10 scores before the week, you'd probably feel pretty happy about your results, your analysis going in. Just when a 43%, person of chalk goes out there and finishes, with 137 fantasy points, it's pretty tough to beat, right? So sometimes you got to set your expectations correctly. So for my large field GPP, I actually lost money here. My single entry, I entered across all the single entries. This was the $100 single entry, and it finished in 12th place. So that was with a missed cut. We had Tom Kim, Hoagie in there, one of my sleeper picks. Siwoo Kim, Poston, and KH Lee. Now, outside of Kim, Hoagie, and Kim, it was really a dicey lineup. It wasn't really going my way. Poston didn't make that many birdies over the weekend. KH Lee hardly made the cut on the number. And of course, hometown guy, right? Home golf course, ended up missing the cut horribly down there with Scott Piercy. So I didn't have massive aspirations for this lineup, yet still ended up cashing me about 2.6x my entries. So you can see I won $160 here, but in the other contests, I made, probably another $250 profit there too. So made about 450, I believe it was like 444, something like that in terms of profit this week with my single entries, which makes up for the $170 that we lost, right? So overall, we ended up making right around like $200 and something last week. There were a few other cash contests that I entered that actually didn't end up cashing in because everyone had Cantlay in those contests, and I went a little bit of a different round, went a little bit more balanced with my exposure there. But overall, was right around a $200 win, which gives us extra units going into next week. But I want to set your expectations there, right? If we lost these single entries, we would have been down $600, $700, something like that, right? That's a massive swing. So the time that you're investing into this single entry, it should be almost proportional to what you're doing with your, exposure over here, 4-round stuff. I had $750 on my 4-round stuff for GBPs, and then in my single entries, I believe it was like $188, I believe, if I remember correctly, when it comes to my exposure there. So that's what we were rolling with last week, right? So we didn't win the GPP. My best lineup here was 158th place. It was a Tom Kim, Montgomery, Hoagie lineup. We also had McNeely, Hadley, and Goddard up in there. So you can see, right, I had my low-owned option in Hadley, but the lineup wasn't anything crazy. I was a little bit more balanced. That's kind of what I was alluding to before. Next lineup had Kim and Montgomery once again with Siwoo. Just a solid lineup, right? You can see, like, it's all guys finishing in the top 10, top 20 with our value picks. The huge difference, right? We go to the top of the leaderboard here. Let me just show all the lineups. Go back to the top here, just all these points for Cantlay for these, birdie streaks, the bogey-free rounds, all rounds under 70. For Matthew Neesmith, right, the all rounds under 70 bonus. He had one birdie streak, but 3 bogey-free rounds. Those extra stats at a birdie fest make all of the difference, and unfortunately, it was the 2 pieces of chalk that got there. And I don't want to spoil too much. Let's just go ahead and hop into the player poll at this point to give you an idea of a player-by-player analysis, where I was with my exposure, my projections, and what we can learn from it. All right, so we've got a little spreadsheet up here with my projections from last week. So this was for the Shriners, and I've added a few tabs. So we have the actual ownership. This is for that $5, 150 max that we were in there. My exposure, which was how much I had of them percentage-wise in my player poll. So because I was playing 150 lineups, right? So if I had 22%, it means I played them in 33 lineups, so on and so forth. And then my leverage is essentially just my exposure minus the actual ownership. It was how much over the field I was or under the field on every single player. And lastly, this is all sorted now by their points scored. So you can see at the top, we've got Tom Kim, the winner. You got Patrick Cantlay there, so on and so forth down the board. And we're just going to talk through the list. So as I alluded to, of the top 10 scorers, I had 8 of them in my player poll. 2 of them were core picks. One of them was a sleeper pick in Tom Hoagie. And a lot of them were these lone sleeper picks that I give to my Patreon members. So let's talk through a few of them. Let's start with the fades, though. And it's the talking point, right? It's where we went wrong this week. I got to talk about it. Patrick Cantlay, right? I thought he was going to be like 33% owned, which was already egregious to me. And when he came in at 43%, I couldn't have been happier. Anytime a player is going to be that highly owned, particularly in a sport as volatile as golf, and I don't care if Patrick Cantlay's course history is where it is, right? We look at this course history here, and it's glaring. It's now with another win, it's just ridiculous. 8th, 2nd, 1st, and then now you had another win here in 2023. Just ridiculous level stuff for Patrick Cantlay, but it's unsustainable. At a certain point, he's most likely going to finish in like 6th to 10th place, kind of like what you saw for Sanjay M. And he very well could have been the optimal play that went out there and won this week. And you can see I was on him this week. He was at the bottom of that top 10 in terms of scores. And he actually came in higher owned than I expected too. So he came in owned 20%. I guess it was. Actually, I'm looking at the wrong player here. He came in higher than I thought there. He came in 34%. I thought he was going to be right around 27%. So I didn't have much leverage at all. In fact, just 6% leverage on a 34% owned player, which is far from ideal. So I really didn't even get to take advantage of it. I was much more interested, you can see, in taking guys like a Tom Kim, who I played in 38% of lineups. I got huge leverage on guys like a Tom Hoagie, got huge leverage on Amito Pereira, Siwoo Kim, also guys like Taylor Montgomery. Had a lot more leverage to the field on than a lot of these other players, right? You can see 13%. We had 20% on Tom Kim. That was our highest leveraged player up top. But negative 43% on a Patrick Cantlay, negative 12% on a Matthew Neesmith. That single-handedly derailed us, right? Because, like I mentioned, I had a lot of these 7 and 8K options that went off. I started a lot of my top lineups with a Tom Kim and Taylor Montgomery because then I was able to fit in players like a Siwoo Kim. I was able to fit in a few of these top of the 7K options like Amito Pereira, for example. That was my optimal build, right? Out of my player pool, those sort of lineups were funneling to the top. It's just that there was such a drop off here, and some of it's part of the placement points, right? Patrick Cantlay tying for second had a huge impact on the rest of the player pool, but the bonuses that Neesmith was getting, all of the bogey-free rounds that Patrick Cantlay, all that birdie production that he was posting out there, really just those sort of fine margins can take you from having a slightly negative week like I had to potentially winning that GPP, right? If I, let's say, it's always these hypothetical situations. If I just decided to play Patrick Cantlay this week, even if I don't play Matthew Neesmith, I'm at least finishing in the top 5 of that GPP. And of course, if we play both of them, I had the nuts otherwise too, right? So we were getting to that optimal lineup for sure. So it's easy to say that after the fact, should I have made a different decision is really what we have to ask ourselves. And I would say no. I think that it was the right play to go out there and fade Patrick Cantlay. I'll stand behind that. He was 43% owned, right? He came in even higher owned than we thought he would. I don't think we've ever seen that for a player, something over 40% before in these large field GPPs. And I know, right? He went out there and he nearly won, right? He was in that optimal lineup. I would do it again. Like if you gave me a slate tomorrow and he told me he was going to be 43% owned, I would have to fade it. It's just from a numbers perspective. And I know at this event, the course history, all but one time he's probably been in the optimal lineup at this point. So he's 4 for 5. He's gone 80%. Truly, over a full sample size, he's not going to be 80% finishing first or second at this event. It's just not going to happen. That's completely unsustainable. So if it happens next year where he's 50% owned, let's say we have a similar level field next year, he's going to be a fade once again. So I want to put that out there. I think I made the right decision there. And honestly, I probably would make the same decision again. With Matthew Neesmith, he was only 12% owned. So you can see I thought it'd be 12.7. He came in 11.7. So it's not like our ownership projections were far off when it came to Matthew Neesmith. It's just that the impact wasn't nearly as bad as taking him, I thought, right? Like a 12% owned player, like even chalk in the 7K range, if I was going to take him, I probably would have played like 25%. I would have put him in a quarter of my lineups. And you can see I took other guys down here pretty close to that, right? Like, what is it? I had 22% Siwoo Kim. Let's see, with Mito Pereira, I had 20% there. I would have had to have been a little bit more aggressive with the Matthew Neesmith than I was with those players. But it's not like Mito Pereira didn't bring missed cut equity to the table, right? And he was 10% owned, just 1% less owned than a Matthew Neesmith. Clearly, I had them at a 2.3% difference in terms of their ownership. Those fine differences in terms of ownership can make huge differences. And, this is where I want to be self-critical here, right? Like sometimes, 0.5, 0.6% difference when it comes to your ownership might not matter. When it gets to that 2% number, you really start to see a few implications with your pool. Like you start to act differently, right, with how you impact players. So maybe that was the blind spot there, right? But you could see both plays, right? It was 0.3 off in terms of the ownership there with Mito Pereira, and we were only 1% off with the Matthew Neesmith. But cumulatively, right, that difference was just, it had a bigger impact because they were both going in the same direction, right? So a lot of times when we're looking at ownership, I think we have to consider like the dual impact, not just, I was 1% off on one player, right? Because sure, I was extremely accurate, I'd say, with both of those ownership projections right there. But it did lead me to act differently just because they were just minutely off. And you're never going to have perfect ownership projections. In fact, if we were to go and, for next week, I'm actually going to add a tab where it shows the difference here. Now, I was relatively spot on, right? Patrick Cantlay now was 10% off. Most people were about 10% off when it came to his ownership. I don't think anybody thought he'd be 44% owned. Tom Kim, I also thought would be a little bit higher owned. Some people had him at 30%, so I was actually a little bit closer in Tom Kim's ownership than a lot of other people there. But Tom Hoagie, right, we were really close with 1.2% off right there. Let's see. A couple percent off on SH Kim. People love themselves some SH Kim, and that's only going to continue with his performance this week. But across the board, maybe 1.5% off at most of these guys up top. You get into this range down here, we're almost all within 1%, 0.1% there, 0.2% right there, 1.5% for the Jason Day ownership. People hate playing Jason Day. I should have expected that. I thought because of the weak field, people might get to him, right, 3.8%. It's a little bit more bullish on it, but you get the idea up here, right? Even those small differences matter, right? That's why we put ownership down to a point difference, a decimal point down there, because those tenths of a percent actually matter, right? And, some people will be like, oh, it's just a tenth. It's a tenth of a percent, actually. It's an even smaller margin than you realize out there, but it all makes massive differences. So talked about the pieces of chalk that didn't hit. Let's talk about the plays that went well, right? Tom Kim, he was my pick to win. I bet him outright. A lot of people in the Discord also bet him outright this week, so that was lovely to see a lot of people hit that. If you told me he was going to be 18% owned, I probably would have played 50%. So I personally went with 38%, got a solid leverage, over 2x leverage to the field. That was one of the brighter spots that we had. Tom Hoagie was another bright spot. I played twice the field, or at least twice what I thought the field would be at 11%. He came in actually a little bit lower owned than that, so we were just over 2x exposure there too. Considering he was the third highest scorer on the slate, that was great. But he wasn't in the optimal build, right? If you remember from earlier, it was the Cantlay, Tom Kim lineups that were all up there in the top 10. So for as great as he played, he didn't matter. It's not like he helped us get to the top of the GPPs. Now, over there in our single entry, you saw he helped us win a lot of money, right? So, there's fine margins when it comes to the large field 150 max sort of contest, particularly when somebody's going to be 43% owned and in the nuts lineup. But when you're playing single entries, you have a lot more leeway. And in fact, because I was taking Tom Kim and Tom Hoagie and Siwoo Kim in that single entry, I still had a lot of salary. to spend in the 7K range, right? Scott Piercy was that one guy I took a shot on this week, and of course he missed the cut. Outside of that, it was a relatively balanced build. So, it all depends on the contest you're in. So I guess it mattered there. You talked about Neesmith. Mito Pereira, I was twice the field on. You could see he had 20%, which was, twice the projection that I had him at, and pretty much came out true there. SH Kim, I only had 10% of. I wish I had more. I was only 3.5% over the field there when it came to my leverage, which isn't ideal. Probably should have played like 15%, but again, I thought I was going to be 4.6% owned, not 6.5% owned. Sibu Kim, I played a solid amount over the field. I played over 2x the field. That was great. He had a really good week. Might have another solid week over here for the Zozo. Adam Hadwin, I played 18%, so I wasn't that much over the field there. I wasn't all that excited to play Adam Sadman, as I call him from time to time, so I didn't go crazy there. Taylor Montgomery played a bunch, 33%, which he came in higher owned than Tom Kim, which to me was outrageous. I mean, Tom Kim at the President's Cup was coming in with all the momentum that we needed, won at the Wyndham. It was a perfect golf course for him. And then Taylor Montgomery was the higher owned player. So if I would have known that in hindsight, I probably wouldn't have played Taylor Montgomery, and I may have locked Tom Kim, right? Like if you told me he was 18% owned ahead of time, I may have played him in every single lineup that I had. And I know hindsight's 2020, right? He won the golf tournament. It's easy to say, but I bet him outright. He was that guy I told you I thought was winning this week. I said it in the Core Picks video last week. I said it to everyone that asked me who I thought was going to win this week. Sometimes you just got to lock a player like that, particularly if the ownership starts swaying that direction. But again, I thought he'd be 24%, and I thought Taylor Montgomery was going to be 27%, right? And I keep getting these. This spreadsheet's a little bit off here. Sorry, first time doing this here. He came in 20%, right? And it pretty much spot on with what I thought, but Tom Kim came in way lower owned. Just sometimes the industry is a little bit off on their ownership, and is what it is. A lot of this is, by the way, people ask how I do my ownership. Part of it is aggregating a lot of what we see over the industry, and then part of it is my own algorithm, right? So I'll take a baseline of what I see around the industry, and then using a lot of the indicators that I'm looking for, which some of it is sentiment. So some of it's, content that I'm seeing. I'll boost up a player's sentiment rating, which is essentially how much that they're liked. And that's something that pretty much stays consistent from event to event. So guys like a Ricky Fowler, Jordan Spieth, for example, Xander Schauffele, that people just love playing, get artificial boosts in ownership, and people always talk about that. That's how I actually encapsulate that, is in their sentiment rating. So, they'll get a projection based on the algorithm, which a lot has to do with their projections and their price. And then based on their sentiment rating, they'll get a boost either up or down, right? Patrick Reed, when he was out here in tour, was getting a boost down because nobody likes playing him. Bubba Watson, same sort of thing. Jason Day has a negative sentiment rating. People don't like playing him. Hideki, when he was dealing with the injury news, had a hugely negative sentiment rating, right? So even if he was projecting well, I was going to project him low for ownership because of some of that negative attention. That's how I do a lot of my ownership. And Tom Kim, you'd think that his sentiment rating would have been positive, and that's why I think I projected him for more ownership than other people. I thought the President's Cup would be a huge plus, but so many people around the industry were telling people to fade Tom Kim that I think people just overthought it and talked themselves off of it. If I would have known that, right, it would have been a lot more aggressive. I guess that's the point that I'm trying to make there. Whereas with Taylor Montgomery, I saw a few people around the industry saying that he was a solid play. Getting to him made sense, much like I did, right? He was a core pick, right? Talked him up in that video. That I think that's why his ownership stayed where we expected it to be, whereas Tom Kim went down. Sungjae Im was a decent play. I didn't get enough leverage there, so I played him in 40% of my lineups, which is just 6% more than the actual ownership. And he came in higher owned than we expected, but I guess kind of like a Patrick Cantlay, people just wanted to spend all of their salary. And the guys here in the 8K range were royally under-owned. So let's go ahead and talk through some of those because they had decent rounds. They had decent tournaments, but they didn't crack open the slate. So you can see Maverick here, right? He scored 105 fantasy points. He only came in 8.3% owned, which is pretty much right where we had him at. I played 18%, and that was well over the field. Harry Hall played well. He's 6,600. But let's get to some of these 8K guys. Hisham Bazainhout, 7.9% owned projected, 8.1. Came in super low owned there. Lucas Herbert only came in 4.3%. Let's go down to find more of these 8K options. Let's see. JT Poston, right? 7.2% owned. This entire 8K range was royally underlooked. And the next time we get one of these weak field events where there's maybe two guys up top that are getting all the win equity, Maybe you have somebody at 10 to 1, somebody at 15 to 1, and then there's a huge drop off. Kind of like what we saw for this golf tournament. You got to pepper this 8K range, right? That's what I did for this golf tournament, and it, didn't work out. But remember, we had 8 of the top 10 in our player pool, and if Cantlay and Neesmith just fuck off this week, like, I'm winning all the money, right? Like, we're a lot closer than it looks when it comes to the ROI. Single entry smash this week. We still ended up profiting, but you get the point here, right? I think we have to take these low-owned options. If somebody's going to be 43% owned, Neesmith really wasn't as toggy, right? We kind of talked about that. But if all these guys are going to be single digits and they had decent weeks, it's not like they didn't pay off, right? I mean, where are we at? Let's go. Let's find a few more of these options. We had JT Post in here. Cameron Davis, right? $9,200. He was 12% owned. He came in even lower owned than I thought. I thought he'd be 18%. He had a huge sentiment around him. Only 12.9% because everyone wanted to play Montgomery. They wanted to play Tom Kim there in the 9K range, and then those 2 guys there in the 10K range came in super low owned. Let's look at Max Homa, actually. Another fade, right? So Max Homa here, he didn't pay off. It was a good fade for us, right? But 13.4%, even lower owned than I expected. If these type of fields where you have like 2, like Cantlay and Sanjay, right? Great course history coming in with form, you like have to play these pivots. And I know it didn't work out, but if you're gonna tell me someone's gonna be 13%, like these ownership numbers, like I was already projecting them low. They were way more polarized than we expected, right? Cantlay's ownership was through the roof. Then you had all of these sort of players. I mean, Sanjay's ownership was also through the roof. But then you have all these guys that were lower owned than they should have been. I know it didn't work out this time, and I'm just gonna keep saying this. I'm definitely going back to that. This is good to know because, after the fact, just all of this polarization is a fact of how much people liked Catcher Cantlay or how much people liked guys like Neesmith or getting to a few of the other guys over 20%, that we've talked about so far. Let's see what went wrong. So we talked about these plays. They all went pretty well. All made the cut here. They weren't hurting your lineup. So Patrick Rogers, Justin Lauer, I played 8%. We had 12% Harris English. That went pretty well. 20% of Lucas Herbert. So that was actually one of my bigger stands that I made this week. You can see I had nearly 16% leverage on a 4.3% owned player. So we were well over the field on Lucas Herbert, and it almost paid off. He was our first-round leader for quite some time. Bazane Hoot, we also had over twice X the field. Brendan Todd played pretty decently. We also had Adam Shank, Harry Hall. Now, Harry Hall only played 7%. In hindsight, I wish I played a lot more, but he was a huge risk, had looked horrible to this point of his career. And even though he was a member at Summerlin, I didn't want to spend too much on him. So 7% probably made a lot of sense. Let's go down to the guys that missed the cut now. So these guys hardly made the cut, like Keith Mitchell. I played 2x the field there. I thought it'd only be 7%. He came in 10%. So a lot of people wanted to get to that pivot. I guess that made sense. Cage Lee and Lipsky were okay, right? I played Smotherman. He was okay. Taylor Pendrith was all right after his first round, right? He shot like +3 the first day, ended up coming back. So you had to like the fight back there, but he came in 12%. I played 2x the field exactly. So that was about as standard a play as you're going to get. Honestly, I'd play Pendrith again. Outside of that first round, he looked great. The birdie production was there. He just had a little bit of an unlucky round there. In terms of guys that missed the cut, I think the first one was Justin Suh. So let's see. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 players missed the cut. And the last time I counted, we had like 35 players make the cut. So from a percentage standpoint, we were well over the field when it comes to percentage. I had 47 6 of 6 lineups out of 150. So I was just under a 33% rate, which was right around 2.2x the field when it came to 6 of 6 percentage. So we did pretty well there, but I did take Justin Suh. I thought he'd bounce back, and he looked pretty good at some point through the second round there, but fell off rather quickly. Callum Turan ended up missing the cut inexplicably at the end, made a bogey, I believe 2 holes before he ended up finishing up. So that screwed us there. Kurt Kitayama missed the cut by 2 there. That was surprising. He had a really rough round when it came to bogeys there on Friday. We played Seamus Power, who missed the cut too. Same thing with Chris Kirk. Both of those players were disappointing. I played 20 and 15% respectively. Denny McCarthy, I played 15% of. He missed the cut. I'd probably do it again. He was one of those 8K options, right, that came in super low owned. In fact, he was actually the highest owned of all of them, and he's the one that missed the cut. So, of course, Seamus Power actually came in lower owned than I projected him at, which was a little surprising, but we were pretty much spot on there, pretty much spot on with our Chris Kirk ownership. You can see, guys, like at the top, the ownership was a little bit volatile and it led to a few mistakes being made. But outside of that, like the ownership was ridiculously accurate. I'm pretty happy about it. This Gree ownership, I projected him a lot higher round than he definitely was supposed to be. But that was part of that top end range that was so polarized. So I think the main thing we need to learn from, or at least I do, right? I'm kind of saying we as a community here, is the ownership up top, especially if people are going to be as much enthralled with Cantlay and Sanjay as they were, we have to account for that. The ownership's going to look really wacky. You're going to have a lot of these low-owned players and guys that are super mega chalk. So we're learning. We're taking notes for next time, right? Moving down a little bit further, we got Cam Champ. Played him. He looked like absolute dog shit. Nothing else to say there. David Ligmarth, we took a shot on. Did not work. Ryan Armour, same thing. And Scott Piercy. He was the one that hurt the most, right? Because you'll remember, he was in my single entry. And he was the worst player that we took out of the entire player pool this week. So, sometimes that's going to happen. I don't really want to question it. He was playing pretty decent golf coming in, and he was a member at this golf course. So I'd probably do it again under the same circumstances. But all things being said, I feel like we had a pretty solid week. You can see his ownership was actually a little higher than we thought, too. A lot of that due to that narrative, I suppose. But overall, pretty solid week, right? Outside of missing on Cantlay up top, who, again, was 43% owned, I'm pretty happy about our performance, right? Anytime you can profit week to week, you have to be pretty happy, pretty stoked about that over here. And the last 4 weeks, we've been in contention in the GPPs. I mean, at the President's Cup, I was in the top 5 for quite some time there on Sunday. Fortinet, we had a really good tournament. Sanderson Farms was a little bit more dicey, I'll say, right? Because of the Mackenzie Hughes wedding, I didn't have him. Wasn't quite in contention. But after 3 days, we were in contention after Saturday at the very least. So we're getting really close to the GPPs here. So I think it's a good time to kind of get into this, show you some of the strategy. Overall, main takeaways, just from a generalistic standpoint, sometimes the ownership up top is going to be super polarized. We just have to keep that in mind. We've never seen 43% anymore, but now that it's hit, somebody went out there and nearly won at 43%. I think you're going to see it more and more going forward. Neesmith wasn't as chalky as I thought. That's just something I need to note in the back of my head. People don't love playing him. And outside of that, pretty solid with the process. Just keep doing what we're doing right now, and I think good things will come. All right, fellas, that is all I've got for this Slate review video. I know it's a little bit last second. It's going to be coming out on Mondays going forward. But again, comment down below whether you want it in a live chat version or maybe in a video version going forward. Also, go ahead and smash that like button. And best of luck for all of your lineups this week. I'll be coming out with a core picks video this afternoon, getting ready for the coming Zozo Championship over there in Japan. Be going through our value picks as per usual. So still going to be covering all of the content that we typically do here, just a little bit of a different schedule. Mondays will be the slate review, and Tuesdays, when we actually have ownership to go off of, I have an idea to look around the industry, scout out what a lot of the other people are doing. I can bring you guys my core picks and value picks. So looking forward to that. Best of luck with all of your lineups coming up for this week. And next week on Monday, we'll have the next slate review. Hopefully bring it down to GPP, right? Hopefully it's a slate review of us winning 25 grand. But even if it's us going out there and getting absolutely wiped, going to bring you the results. Going to talk about what goes wrong if that ends up being the case. And if we end up winning, we'll talk about what went right, right? Obviously, that's the beauty of this, is a little bit of accountability, a little bit of transparency here that I think a lot of the other cappers don't give you, where we can talk about my ownership projections, my actual projections, and really give you a taste for the process, because I think a lot of other people out there are selling this fake idea that these DFS pros win every single week, that they go out there and they're able to just wipe the field every single time. And the reality is, and I track a lot of them, it's very easy, especially when you can download the CSV of everyone's lineups, to see how everyone did. And a lot of times, I'm having a week where, maybe I'm slightly negative EV, and, I had a pretty damn good player pool, and I see other people out there like, oh, solid smash week, all 6 core picks finish in the top 15. Yet when you look at their actual results, they're like losing half their money in the large field GPP, right? Because top 15s don't even matter that much. You saw this week, right? My player pool was perfect outside of Cantlay, and I still lost money in the large field GPP. You'd think from looking at a lot of those people's tweets that they're like winning all this money when they're losing money week to week, right? So you feel bad when you lose money, yet it's just because you don't have the proper perspective. So that's also the goal of doing this video, is to give you some of that perspective too. So hopefully you enjoyed it. I know it's a long video. A lot of you probably didn't stay to the end, which I understand, right? A lot of you are just here for the picks. But if you enjoy this strategy-based content, a little bit more in-depth type of content, go ahead and show some love to the video, right? Let me know that, right? Because if this is the type of stuff that you guys want to see going forward, a little bit more process-based, a little bit more of a deep dive, I'm more than willing to do it. I think it's the most useful information out there. It's a little bit more involved, takes me a little bit more time to do, but I'm always willing to put that effort in if it's well received. So best of luck out there, boys. Let's go out there and smash for the Zozo, and I'll catch you guys for next week.